You slip into a world where every shadow feels heavier, every silence more suffocating, and every tick of the clock more unbearable. In this story, you are not a bystander, but an observer pressed against the glass of other people's darkest hours. You stand in a small American town where nothing ever seemed out of place until one quiet evening when a child does not return home. The dinner table is set, the food cools, and the mother's voice cracks as she calls out into the night. The neighbors peer through blinds, curious at first, then unsettled. You feel the atmosphere change in the community, like oxygen being sucked away. Someone has vanished, and in that absence, terror is born. The early hours of a kidnapping are a cruel paradox. You cling to the hope that the victim might simply have wandered off, that any second they'll come walking through the door. But you know the truth hides in the stillness. You can almost hear the whispered panic in the household, the desperate phone calls, the trembling voices reporting to police. Sirens wail in the distance. Flashlights cut through darkened backyards, searching every shed, every ditch, every shadow. But the trail is already cold. You think of the Lindbergh baby in 1932, a case that would forever stain America's history. A toddler stolen from his crib in the middle of the night while his famous parents slept only feet away. You imagine the fear coursing through the household as the crib was found empty, a ransom note left mocking them in its place. The child's disappearance would spark the largest manhunt the country had ever seen, and though the name Charles Lindbergh once carried triumph, it was now tangled with grief and scandal. The abduction was not just a family tragedy, it became a national nightmare. But the Lindbergh case was only the beginning. Decades later, you see another disappearance echo through the streets. The sudden vanishing of Etten Potts in 1979, the little boy who disappeared on his way to school in New York City. His innocent face would soon stare out from milk cartons, a haunting innovation in America's battle to find missing children. Parents gripped their children's hands tighter, strangers became threats, and you realize how a single disappearance can alter the fabric of daily life for millions. The pattern of vanishing is merciless. In some stories, it is a child snatched from a yard. In others, a young woman lured by a false promise of work or opportunity. Sometimes it happens in broad daylight, a car door slamming shut before anyone can react. Other times, it happens under cover of darkness, leaving no witnesses and no sound but the echo of grief. You see how these kidnappings ripple through communities, each disappearance eroding a sense of safety until even the most ordinary routine, walking to school, playing in the yard, running errands, feels dangerous. What chills you most is how ordinary everything seems before the vanishing. A child's shoes left neatly by the door, a bicycle resting against a fence, a jacket draped over a chair. The victim is gone, but their world is frozen in place, as if waiting for them to return. You imagine the rooms left behind, bedrooms with toys untouched, beds neatly made, and the lingering scent of a presence now stolen. Every detail becomes a cruel reminder of absence. Police arrive, but in the first hours, their hands are tied. Without clear evidence, without witnesses, they are racing against an invisible enemy. Each minute that passes makes recovery less likely. The family clings to hope, but you can feel the gnawing dread beneath their words. You know how these stories often end, and yet you cannot stop yourself from hoping too. In America's most notorious kidnapping cases, disappearance is the first act of horror. It is sudden, merciless, and designed to tear apart not only the victim's life, but the entire circle of people who love them. From the Lindbergh baby to Eaton Potts, from nameless thousands to the few who make headlines, the story begins the same way. A life stolen in silence, leaving behind only questions that echo louder than any answer. You feel it now, the way absence becomes a presence. Every empty chair is a wound, every closed door a reminder. When someone vanishes, they are never truly gone. They linger in the spaces they once filled, and those left behind are condemned to relive the moment again and again. And as you stand here, in the middle of these stories, you realize that vanishing without a trace is not just about disappearance, it is about the birth of a nightmare that no one wakes from. You move deeper into the story, where shadows take shape and fear acquires a voice. The victim is no longer just missing. Someone out there holds the power of life and death over them. In the silence left behind, a new sound rises. The rustle of paper, the scrape of a pen, the sharp edges of words that demand, threaten, and deceive. A ransom note. The Lindbergh case set the tone for what America would come to expect from its most infamous kidnappings. You picture that first crude message, written with deliberate misspellings and strange symbols, demanding $50,000 in exchange for the safe return of the child. But ransom notes are more than simple requests for money. They are psychological weapons. They dangle hope in front of grieving families while tightening the leash around their throats. Every word becomes a trap, a promise of return that may already be impossible. You see the parents clutching the letter, hands shaking, eyes scanning each line for clues. Is the kidnapper educated or uneducated, calm or unhinged, close by or far away? The words themselves are fragments of the abductor's mind, and police pore over them, searching for handwriting quirks, linguistic patterns, even the type of paper used. But to the family, all that matters is the desperate possibility of reunion. You can almost hear their whispered debates in the dark. Should we pay? Should we wait? Will giving in save our child or seal their fate? Sometimes the ransom is money. Other times, it is silence. In some cases, kidnappers instruct families not to contact authorities, threatening to harm the victim if they disobey. This forces parents into a prison of secrecy where every phone call could mean death. You imagine the unbearable weight of keeping neighbors, friends, even extended family in the dark while pretending life continues as usual. The world becomes a stage, and the performance is survival. But kidnappers are not always honest. Many notorious cases reveal a cruel pattern: ransom notes as false promises. Families pay only to learn the victim was already gone. The Lindberghs lived this nightmare. Their baby's body was discovered weeks after the ransom was delivered. You feel the sting of betrayal, the realization that hope had been weaponized against them. Other times, ransom demands expose a sadistic mind at work. In the 1960s, Barbara Mackle, a wealthy young woman, was buried alive in a wooden box by her kidnappers. They left a ransom note instructing her family to pay $500,000 if they wanted to see her again. The kidnappers described the buried box in detail, noting the small air pump installed to keep her alive, proof of her entrapment, and a reminder of how close death was with each passing breath. To write such a note required a chilling level of calculation, and you can almost feel the cold sweat of her parents as they read it. And then there are cases where ransom has nothing to do with money at all. Sometimes the note is a manifesto, a demand for recognition, a declaration of power. It is less about wealth and more about control, forcing the world to acknowledge the kidnapper's existence. You see how this makes the abduction not just a personal crime, but a performance for the public. Every line of ink is a stage direction in a show of cruelty. Law enforcement, meanwhile, dances carefully between strategy and fear. They must decide whether to play along, to negotiate, to stall for time. You watch investigators lean over photographs of notes, measuring handwriting loops, comparing ink strokes, sending samples to labs. A ransom note is both a demand and a confession, a piece of the kidnapper's identity exposed. But unraveling it takes time, time the victim may not have. You feel the suffocating pressure of these moments. The phone rings, the voice on the other end distorted, low, commanding. The family clings to every syllable, listening for background noise, for hints of location. But the calls are short, calculated, and cruel. The kidnapper always has the upper hand. False promises, cruel tricks, hope dangled like a carrot before breaking into dust. This is the dark psychology of ransom. It is not merely about money. It is about control, about reducing human life to a bargaining chip. Each note, each call, each instruction is a knife twisted deeper, not just in the victim's body, but in the hearts of everyone who loves them. And as you lean closer to these stories, you realize that ransom is not really about return at all. It is about manipulation. It is about bending the will of families and police alike, pulling them into the kidnapper's theater of fear. Sometimes the notes lead to a reunion. Other times, they lead only to a grave. Either way, the victim's fate hangs on words scratched onto paper, words that carry the weight of nightmares. You are swept into the relentless motion of pursuit, where time becomes both ally and enemy. Every second counts, every lead is precious, and every mistake can mean a life lost forever. This is the world of manhunts and narrow escapes, where investigators chase shadows and victims cling to survival with nothing but raw will. The image of missing posters taped to lampposts and storefront windows burns into your mind. Grainy photographs of children, young women, or even entire families stare back at passersby. Their eyes seem to plead from paper, "Find me." Police officers knock on doors, canvass neighborhoods, interview witnesses, and follow tips that fizzle out more often than they ignite. Helicopters circle above, bloodhounds trace faint scents, and the manhunt unfolds like a desperate chess match against an unseen opponent. You think of the case of Elizabeth Smart in 2002, abducted from her Salt Lake City bedroom in the dead of night. For months, she was hidden in plain sight, paraded through towns by her captors disguised in robes. The nation watched helplessly as search efforts grew colder, tips dried up, and her name became another on the growing list of missing. Yet Elizabeth clung to hope, waiting for the one moment where her survival instincts and the outside world would finally align. That moment came when a passerby recognized her on the street, proving that even the most meticulous captor can falter under the weight of vigilance. Not all victims are rescued by chance. Some carve their own narrow escape. You see J.C. Dugard in 1991, kidnapped at age 11 and held captive for 18 years. The sheer endurance of her survival feels almost impossible to comprehend. You imagine her strength, living each day under the crushing weight of control, finding fragments of humanity in a life stolen from her. When she was finally discovered, the revelation shocked America, not just because of the horror of her captivity, but because she had survived long enough to be found. Not all victims are rescued by chance. Some carve their own narrow escape. You see J.C. Dugard in 1991, kidnapped at age 11 and held captive for 18 years. The sheer endurance of her survival feels almost impossible to comprehend. You imagine her strength, living each day under the crushing weight of control, finding fragments of humanity in a life stolen from her. When she was finally discovered, the revelation shocked America, not just because of the horror of her captivity, but because she had survived long enough to be found. Survival is never guaranteed. You picture the victims who seize rare chances to flee, slipping bonds, breaking free of locked doors, running barefoot through woods or neighborhoods, banging on strangers' doors for help. These narrow escapes are acts of raw courage, but also acts of desperation, fueled by the knowledge that the next chance may never come. You can almost feel their pounding hearts, the sting of gravel under their feet, the desperate prayers whispered under breath. Please let someone open the door. Meanwhile, investigators chase trails that twist and vanish. In the case of Patty Hearst in 1974, the granddaughter of a publishing magnate, the manhunt became entangled in political theater. She was kidnapped by the Symbionese Liberation Army, a radical group that twisted her captivity into propaganda. When she later appeared to join her captors in armed robberies, the country was left to wonder, was she a victim, a traitor, or both? The manhunt blurred into a hunt for answers, and the line between captivity and complicity was forever stained with ambiguity. Manhunts are rarely clean. They are messy, riddled with dead ends, false leads, and moments of crushing disappointment. Families cling to every news report, every press conference, hoping for the breakthrough that may never come. You imagine the weight on detectives' shoulders, the missed meals, sleepless nights, the photos of the missing staring back at them from their desks. Each clue feels like a lifeline, yet so often those lifelines unravel into nothing. Technology reshapes the pursuit over time. Amber alerts flash across highways and smartphones, broadcasting abduction details to millions within minutes. Surveillance cameras capture grainy figures, license plates, and fleeting moments that can make or break a case. DNA, fingerprints, and digital footprints become modern weapons in the hunt. Yet, for all the advances, the essence remains the same: a race against an enemy who is always one step ahead. And yet, you know the cruel truth. Not every manhunt ends in rescue. Sometimes the pursuit uncovers only a body, left discarded as the life itself were worthless. In those moments, justice becomes the only prize left to chase. The manhunt doesn't save the victim, but it can at least drag the predator into the light. But it is the narrow escapes that linger in your mind, the stories where survival seemed impossible, yet somehow was achieved. Elizabeth Smart, J.C. Dugard, and countless unnamed others who outlasted their captors, who found the crack in the armor of control and slipped through. Their stories remind you that even in the darkest prisons, the human will to survive is a weapon more powerful than chains. Manhunts are battles of endurance, escapes are flickers of hope, and in the cruel theater of kidnapping, both sides fight against time itself. You feel the urgency still, the pounding rhythm of footsteps, the searchlights cutting through the night. Somewhere out there, a victim waits. Somewhere out there, an investigator refuses to give up, and the race goes on. You step now into courtrooms heavy with silence, where justice and spectacle collide under the blinding glare of cameras. The kidnappings that once unfolded in the shadows are now exposed to the world, transformed into trials that grip an entire nation. Families sit in the gallery, faces carved from grief, as jurors weigh evidence that feels more like fragments of nightmares than facts. This is where kidnappers meet the weight of the law and where the public's outrage is distilled into judgment. You think again of the Lindbergh baby case, often called the trial of the century, long before O.J. Simpson's trial would inherit the phrase. Bruno Hauptmann, accused of abducting and murdering Charles Lindbergh Jr., sat under the relentless gaze of reporters and a grieving nation. The courtroom became a theater where every word, every piece of handwriting analysis, every nail and board allegedly linked to the homemade ladder used in the crime was dissected in public view. You feel the tension of those proceedings, the desperate need for closure clashing with the uncertainty of circumstantial evidence. Hauptmann was sentenced to death, but whispers of doubt linger even now. Was he truly guilty or a convenient scapegoat? Decades later, trials continued to blur the line between justice and media circus. Patty Hearst's case was unlike anything before it. Abducted by the Symbionese Liberation Army, she shocked the country by appearing to embrace her captor's radical cause. When her trial began, it wasn't just about a kidnapping. It became a national debate about brainwashing, trauma, and free will. Was she a victim, or had she crossed into the role of criminal? The jury decided she was culpable, sentencing her to prison, though later pardoned. But her story forced America to confront uncomfortable questions. How far can coercion bend the human mind, and where does responsibility truly lie? Other trials were quieter but no less haunting. In the case of J.C. Dugard, her captor Philip Garrido finally faced justice after nearly 2 decades of enslavement inflicted on her. The evidence was overwhelming: kidnapping, rape, years of captivity. And yet, hearing the details in a courtroom still felt unbearable. You picture J.C. finally free, her voice steady as she recounted the horror she endured, reclaiming her narrative from the man who had stolen so much of her life. The trial wasn't just about conviction, it was about giving her back her voice. And then there was Elizabeth Smart, who bravely faced her abductor in court. The man who had paraded her through towns, who had tried to break her spirit, now sat powerless as she stood tall. She described the torment, the manipulation, the endless fear. But her testimony was also an act of defiance, transforming her from victim into survivor before the eyes of the world. The jury's guilty verdict was inevitable, but the true victory was hers, the reclaiming of agency stolen in the dead of night. Trials of kidnappers do more than decide guilt. They expose the darkest corners of human cruelty to public light. They become lessons, warnings, and grim spectacles. You see the packed galleries, the endless news reports, the sketches of perpetrators etched into history books. Each case feeds America's collective memory of fear. Parents sit at home watching broadcasts, gripping their children tighter, reminded that safety is never guaranteed. Yet trials also test the justice system itself. Evidence can be thin, emotions run high, and the demand for closure can outweigh the need for certainty. In some cases, convictions are overturned decades later. In others, questions linger forever. Did the right person truly pay for the crime, or did the need for answers eclipse the pursuit of truth? What cannot be denied, though, is the power of the survivor's voice. In modern trials, victims have taken the stand not just to secure convictions, but to reclaim control. Their words pierce the courtroom air with truths that cannot be erased. Their courage forces the nation to listen, to reckon, to confront the brutality lurking behind headlines. And so, as you sit in these courtrooms, you feel the duality of justice. It is both the hammer of the law and the echo of grief. Verdicts bring closure, but they cannot restore what was taken. Sentences offer punishment, but they cannot erase scars. Justice is imperfect, but it is the only weapon society has to strike back against the darkness of kidnapping. And so, trial by trial, America builds its haunted archive of justice, stories of stolen lives, of public outrage, of fragile victories against cruelty. The gavel falls, but the echoes linger, reminding you that justice may end a chapter, but the story never truly closes. You move now beyond the headlines, beyond the trials, into the quieter spaces where the echoes of kidnapping never fade. The courtroom may close, the gavel may fall, but for survivors and families, the story continues in hushed bedrooms, sleepless nights, and the hollow silence of absence. This is the world of scars that never heal, where trauma seeps into every corner of life and reshapes what it means to feel safe. For the families who never see their loved ones again, the wound is endless. You picture Aiton Potts's parents who lived for decades without knowing the truth of what happened to their son. His disappearance became a national symbol, sparking campaigns for missing children, yet for his family, the legacy was intimate. Birthdays never celebrated, a chair always empty, a shadow always present. Their grief was not a moment in time, but a lifetime companion. For survivors, escape is not the end of the nightmare. It is the beginning of a new struggle. Elizabeth Smart, though she rebuilt her life with astonishing strength, has spoken of how the trauma lingered, of how fear and violation leave imprints that cannot simply be erased. You imagine her walking into a crowded room years later, still hyper-aware of faces, movements, threats that others would never notice. Trauma rewires the senses, turning the world into a battlefield even when the danger has passed. J.C. Dugard, after nearly 2 decades of captivity, stepped into a world that had moved on without her. Technology, culture, even the faces of her family had changed. You feel the disorientation she must have endured, trying to piece together a life from fragments, trying to reconcile the child she was with the adult she had become under a captor's control. Healing is not linear. It is jagged, slow, and riddled with setbacks. Communities, too, carry scars. After a high-profile kidnapping, neighbors look at one another differently. Doors are locked sooner, children are watched more closely, trust is eroded. The collective fear lingers, reshaping how people live their everyday lives. You see how the milk carton campaign of the 1980s, faces of missing children printed for all to see, turned breakfast tables into reminders of lurking danger. Parents across America began living in quiet vigilance, always bracing for what might happen. But scars are not only wounds, they are also signs of survival. Survivors like Smart and Dugard eventually used their voices to advocate for others, transforming their pain into strength. They lobbied for stronger laws, created foundations, and spoke publicly about resilience. Their scars became a testament. Yes, they had been broken, but they had also rebuilt. You realize that even in the most horrific cases, human beings can carry light back into the darkness. The legacy of notorious kidnappings also reshaped America's systems of protection. Amber Alerts became nationwide lifelines. Missing persons units grew stronger, using technology to connect cases across states. Parents taught children stranger danger rules, schools implemented new safety protocols, and media learned to amplify missing cases faster. Each kidnapping left not just grief, but reform, proof that scars can also shape progress. Still, the weight never fully lifts. Survivors live with triggers that can snap them back into moments of terror, a scent, a sound, a phrase. Families live with anniversaries that reopen wounds year after year. Communities live with the memory of crime scenes, of vigils, of candlelit gatherings that marked loss and fear. The scars endure, etched into the fabric of personal lives and national memory alike. And you, walking through these stories, feel the heaviness settle inside you. Kidnapping is not just the theft of a body, it is the theft of time, innocence, safety, and peace. Even when survival is achieved, even when justice is won, what was stolen cannot be entirely restored. The victims and families adapt, endure, and rebuild, but the echoes of what was lost never truly fade. This is the lingering legacy of America's most notorious kidnappings. A nation scarred, a people more vigilant, families forever changed, and survivors who carry both pain and strength in equal measure. You leave their stories knowing that while kidnappers sought to destroy, they also revealed the depths of human resilience. And though scars remain, they are proof that even in the darkest of crimes, survival can carve out its own form of justice. And now, as the night draws quieter and you drift toward sleep, you carry with you the weight of these stories. The kidnappings you have witnessed were not just crimes. They were moments that reshaped lives, communities, and even an entire nation's sense of safety. They began with shadows and silence, with lives stolen in an instant. They unfolded through ransom notes, through manhunts and trials, through fear that touched millions who watched from afar. And they left behind scars that remind us of both the cruelty that exists in the world and the resilience that can rise in its wake. In the soft dark of your room, you realize that true crime stories are never just about criminals. They are about the people who survive them, the families who endure the unendurable, and the investigators who refuse to let the missing remain lost. They are about resilience in the face of terror, about finding light even in places meant to extinguish it. So, as you close your eyes, let the heaviness of these tales give way to gratitude for the ordinary, for the simple safety of being where you belong. Let the echoes of trauma soften into whispers of resilience. You have walked through America's most notorious kidnappings, seen how darkness can invade lives, and how survivors still rise to reclaim their voices. Tonight, you are safe. Tonight, you rest, knowing that while the world carries shadows, it also carries light strong enough to outshine them. Sleep now with the stories behind you, and may your dreams be gentle.